Hello and welcome to our special show. I'm Gargi Rawat. Today we're focusing on health and nutrition, especially on proteins and the vital role they play in the health of our population. Proteins are known as the building blocks of life, but a survey a few years ago revealed that over 70% of Indians are protein deficient and above 90% are unaware of the daily requirements of protein. Eating less protein compared to the body's requirement can lead to impaired growth and affect the repair functions in the body. But there are also various myths that surround protein consumption. A majority believe it leads to weight gain. Now, given all these issues, today we're launching the Protinex Protein Abhiyaan. There is an urgent need to create awareness. We'll also tell you about the muscle strength test and encourage you all to take the protein pledge. And to talk more about this and create awareness, today we are joined by Dr. Amrish Mittal, Chairman, Endocrinology and Diabetes, Max Healthcare, Sriram Padmanabhan, Marketing Director, Danone, and Vinita Bali, Chair of the CI National Committee on Nutrition. Thank you so much all for joining us today on the program. And Dr. Mittal, I'd like to start with you. And, we're talking about how there's not enough awareness and also that people aren't, consuming enough protein. So if you can tell us more about it, about its importance and why it's, something that's worrying the protein consumption.
So thank you for having me here. Proteins are one of the three macronutrients of the body: proteins, fats and carbohydrates. And as you mentioned, proteins are the building blocks of the body. So when you think of proteins in younger age groups, during pregnancy, during childhood, you're thinking of growth. So if a population is protein deficient, children will not be tall, they will not grow to their potential. And stunting is still prevalent in India to the tune of 35%, or some studies show 38%. So there is a huge area of protein malnutrition there, simply manifesting crudely in retarded growth. But then as you move on, proteins have a very important role in, as you said, they're building blocks for growth, for everything, for muscle.
So important role throughout your life.
Yes, throughout our life. And muscle is a very important part both in children and in young adults and in the elderly. So proteins play a very important role in our muscle building, in our bones, but otherwise they have an important role in so many enzymatic processes, so many hormones, which is my field actually. So many hormones are actually proteins. So proteins are very, very important for our body, and unfortunately over the years protein intakes in India have tended to decline, or at least they are suboptimal. I don't know what is the longitudinal trend, but quite clearly what we see is a lower protein intake than there should be. And why is that? Because our diets do not have enough protein sources. They are either inaccessible because of economic reasons or otherwise. And there is also a lack of awareness about the importance of protein with the average person. So I think these factors make it important for us now to understand the importance of protein, number one, and number two, how to get enough protein in our diets so that we can remain free of numerous things.
So what is it that you advise your patients? Do you advise them, to monitor their nutrition, and also the vegetarian, non-vegetarian issue? How is it different for those who are vegetarian and those who are non-vegetarian?
So a typical conservative estimate of protein requirement for a human being is 0.8 grams per kilograms body weight. Now this is baseline requirement, and if you are an active sportsman, you may require much, much more. A footballer may require much more. Our fast bowlers probably take at least 2 to 3 times of that. So 0.8 grams. Now it seems like nothing much, but when you actually calculate in our patients, we find that very few achieve levels of 50, 55 grams which they should be achieving. They are much closer to 30, 40 levels, often in the mid 40s. So that is one part, because the actual amount of protein is less. The second part is what protein sources are they using. So protein quality is very important, and therefore if you're not using animal source protein, you'll have to mix your proteins very well to make sure you get essential amino acids which are not made in the body. So protein is made of amino acids. Some of them can be made in the body, some cannot. So we need to have the right sources, right amount and the right quality. Now what are common sources? As you said, how do we ask our patients? Very common sources like lentil. Dal in vegetarian diets is an important source of protein. So a good cup of dal would be having about 7-8 grams of protein. It all depends on how you dilute it. If it's all water and a few danas of dal, then you won't get too much protein. But if there's a solid cup of dal, then you may get up to that much. one egg, for example, will give you another 7-8 grams of protein. Cup of milk, 250 ml of milk will again give you in that zone, as will yogurt. So these are common sources of protein. You asked about vegetarian and non-vegetarian, and that's a forever sort of discussion. It is true that it is much easier to attain these targets of protein intake that we would like to in people who also consume non-vegetarian food. So there is no doubt that animal source proteins are better quality, and they're just there. I mean, for those who are non-vegetarian, if they can increase their intake to the appropriate amount, because remember in India, non-vegetarians also often have, some non-vegetarian food once a week.
Yes.
They're still classified as non-vegetarians. That won't add to their protein intake much. So if you have regular non-vegetarian food, especially chicken and fish, which don't have the bad part of protein,
the cholesterols, etc. Yes.
So if you do that, you will achieve that. In vegetarian diets, it will have to be lentils, dairy products. Very, very important. Maligned all the time, but dairy products are actually a very important source of protein for our children and for our adults. And then if you go to more specialized, richer sources, then soya bean type of beans, and some nuts also are good sources. These are vegetarian sources of protein.
All right, but clearly there's a need to create, more awareness, and the fact that our daily diet needs to include this. Vinita Bali, I'd like to go to you next. What are the steps you feel the industry can take to create awareness about protein and nutrition?
Thank you, Gargi, for this question. Certainly a lot that can be done. First of all is just simply raising awareness. Awareness amongst their own employees, awareness amongst the general public, because, one thing that companies know how to do well, and certainly marketing companies know how to do well, is communicate and communicate effectively. I think there is another thing, and there is some work that is being done, and that is the whole area of workplace nutrition. And workplace nutrition is divided into two. It is making more and more of your employees more aware about what constitutes a healthy diet. And equally importantly, whether it is a factory or a place of work, now many people are working from home, but soon that will be behind us. The food that is served in the cafeterias, for example, whether it is for your workers or it's your, white-collar employees, that's another area where if you look at the menu and the menu choices, there is significant room for improvement. There is a third very large area that corporates can contribute to, and that is wherever it is relevant through the CSR efforts. There are several corporates who are looking at education and hunger and so on. And my submission to them is that you cannot look at, or you cannot hope for good education outcomes if you are talking about a population of children that is otherwise undernourished or malnourished. So I think corporates need to look at it holistically and comprehensively, and look at themselves as part of the solution very, very actively.
All right. Dr. Mittal, can the right amount of protein help with lifestyle diseases as well, especially when it comes to type 2 diabetes, which is another big issue that India is facing?
So I'm glad you asked that, because traditionally we think of proteins, as we mentioned, as growth promoting agents of diets or as muscle building blocks. But it is true that it's not just the fact that our children are undernourished and stunted. It's also true that adults and older people who are economically in the affluent classes also often have poor muscle mass because of poor protein intake. So we say Indians are generally sarcopenic, meaning like osteoporosis, like sarco is muscle. So you actually have less muscle mass. So when we talk of type 2 diabetes, we always, and you've heard this before, talk about central fat and how our fat is bad and bad fat is causing that. But we sometimes don't emphasize the importance of muscle mass in that. So a low muscle mass predisposes to insulin resistance and type 2 diabetes. So many Indians actually who are obese, they still have low muscle mass. So they have predominant fat, less muscle mass, and overall they may look, overweight. The BMI may actually be high, normal or high. But they still, so this low muscle mass alone is a predictor of type 2 diabetes, of fatty liver, so many other conditions. So I think it just continues like that. And I'll add one point here. We often leave out the elderly in terms of nutrition. And when we talk of the elderly, we are talking of osteoporosis. We are talking of recovery from fractures. We are talking of falling.
Yes.
Falling, you will realize now as people are living longer, falling has become a big issue. All that is again linked to a muscle mass. So if we actually are able to improve protein intakes throughout life, including in the elderly, we will find that we can improve their muscle mass, improve their muscle strength, reduce their falling rates, hasten their recovery after osteoporotic fractures. So I think it's a whole spectrum. And for the other end of the spectrum, let's look at pregnant women. If the mother is protein deficient, there will be issues with the child, with the growth, with the birth weight and everything. So it starts during pregnancy and continues till the elderly.
All right, so then let's come to the issue of the Protinex Protein Abhiyaan, and Mr. Padmanabhan, if you could tell us about that. So clearly there is a need to create more awareness. Tell us about the Abhiyaan and what all are you planning under it?
Given that we are the category captains over here, it prompted us to start the Protein Week, and we started this in the year 2017. We are now in the 6th year, of the Protein Week running over here. And our mission is very simple. Our mission is to educate Indians on the role of protein, let them know as to who is it for, what it can do for you, more importantly, how much they should be having. And towards that, so this year we have the Protinex Protein Abhiyaan. In its entirety, it's all about educating consumers on the role. It's about educating consumers on who is it for. It's about coming with, the right partnerships to really educate Indians at a mass level. And last but not the least, it is a combination of the right products, the right solutions, which I'll talk about a bit more later, to not just tell as to what is to be done, but how it is to be done, at the end of the day. So that is what this mission is all about in terms of of what we want to do and what we have been doing over the last couple of years.
Right, and we're asking our viewers also to take the protein pledge. It's interesting, to have corporates coming on and trying to create this awareness. Vinita Bali, I'd like to ask you, are there any policies that encourage organizations, to come up with such initiatives like the Protinex Protein Abhiyaan?
So there are various bodies, one of which I'm very closely associated with, which is the CII National Nutrition Committee, and the whole idea there, and people like companies like Danone are very much part of it. The whole idea there is for both the organized food companies as well as the intermediary suppliers to the food companies to really come together and create an awareness, first of all, for what is good nutrition. Certainly there is the role of protein, and we're obviously talking about Protein Abhiyaan, so the focus is greatly on protein, but I think we've been looking at it fairly holistically and saying what is the role of macronutrients, what is the role of micronutrients, and what are some of the policy issues that can be influenced. Because let's also not forget that there are still 800 million Indians who receive their, grains and supply of things like dals, etc., through the public distribution system. So there are many facets in terms of which this problem can be, defined as well as addressed. There is packaged food companies and what packaged food companies are doing through their communication, through their new product development, through working both at the state as well as the central level. There are, suppliers and what they are doing. There is a very large role of NGOs, development agencies, and the government itself in terms of saying how do we increase access to protein-rich foods for everybody. Because I think as, the doctor said earlier, it's a question of not just availability, but also accessibility and affordability. And I think in that, the private sector certainly has a role to play, as does the public sector as well as the government.
All right, so that's very fascinating. We'll slip into a short break now, and on the other side, we'll tell you how you can measure protein. We'll also tell you about the muscle test. Stay with us. back to our special show where we're talking about the importance of protein, how most Indians don't get enough protein in their daily diet. We're also asking you to take the protein pledge. To demonstrate the importance of protein, we're also going to now talk about the muscle test that what you can do at home, which Mr. Padmanabhan is going to tell us about. If you could tell our viewers, what is this test that people can do at home just to know if they have adequate muscle strength?
Yeah. So what we developed is a very simple thing. It's called one leg challenge test. You just need to cross your arms and stand on one leg for as much time as possible. Depending on your age, you're supposed to be standing for a certain time. If you're not able to stand for that recommended time, on your one leg, it essentially means that your strength is not as per your age. If viewers can come to our site, which is protinex.com, and we have a video which explains as to how to conduct this test. Look at the individual results and what do those results mean for them. And through this, we also encourage people, to sort of take a pledge in terms of them taking care of their muscle strength. And given the fact that protein is an important component in helping build muscle strength, to also take a pledge to not just intake more protein, but be more aware of, whether they're having adequate protein or not.
All right, and today, with the lifestyles and now with the COVID, slowly going into the background, though it's still very much there, people are traveling more, all that is back. So how do you encourage people to ensure that they're having adequate intake and, it's not getting affected by their lifestyle and travel, their protein and diet intake?
Sure. I think the first step towards that is to know where you stand, as far as your intake is concerned. And it's not easy to measure, almost on an everyday basis. So again, this is an easy calculator called the Nutri calculator, which is available in protinex.com website. You just need to do your dietary recall, and depending on the dietary recall, what we will let you know is that how much of you are currently consuming the macronutrients, including protein and other nutrients, and what is the recommended dietary allowance as per your age and as per your gender. And it's a very easy tool to quickly know whether you're having the adequate amount of the nutrients, including protein. And that is the first trigger, as far as where do you stand. The second is what are you going to do about it. And I think this is where I think consumers need to be far more aware of the options which are there in the market. I think Dr. Mittal spoke about, how to increase, protein intake as part of your daily diet. But yes, lot of consumers find it very difficult, to sort of keep noting and, increasing it from their daily diet.
True.
And yeah, I think from Protinex, I think, our mission becomes, to sort of fill that gap, and provide solutions, to provide product solutions which are age appropriate and tailor made to as per the life stage that you are in.
That's right. And an interesting thing that I think I've learned is how protein is important throughout your life. It's not just for children. Vinita Bali, coming back to the corporates, do you think the current health and well-being programs at companies and institutions are ignoring element of nutrition literacy, which it's a very important pillar?
There's very little emphasis on nutrition literacy, which is why, there is this big program which the UNICEF is also involved with, which is called Workplace Nutrition or Impact for Nutrition. And I think what we are really saying, Gargi, is we've got to use as many channels of communication, because at the best of times, nutrition is not that easy to understand. There are the macronutrients, there are the micronutrients. You need a balance of all of them. And, somebody talks about protein, somebody talks about, vitamins and minerals. So it really is a question of a dedicated effort to say that if we want to improve the health and nutrition of Indians, then that education must start in schools, that education must continue in places of work, that education must be on social media.
All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us on the show, and Sriram Padmanabhan, of course. And do remember to take the protein pledge and do that muscle test that you just described. It depends on your age, and you can go onto the website and check what that muscle test is. But clearly, the need of the hour is for people to have more awareness about the importance of protein and increase their daily intake, especially, and create awareness among your family and friends as well. Thank you all for joining us, and thank you for watching. Goodbye.